What if everything you believe about seeking truth is itself an elaborate lie? What if your spiritual quest, your philosophical inquiries, your desperate searches for meaning are nothing more than sophisticated forms of running away? There exists a profound Eastern tradition that reveals a disturbing pattern in human consciousness. This tradition suggests that when we claim to seek truth, we are actually constructing increasingly complex escape routes from reality itself. The seeker becomes the sought, the question becomes the answer, and the path becomes the prison. What you are about to discover will strip away the comfortable illusions about your own motivations. You will see how the very act of seeking perpetuates the separation you claim to want to heal. This knowledge carries a warning. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Once understood, it demands a complete reframing of how you approach existence itself. The principle of perpetual seeking. All seeking implies that what you seek is absent. The very act of searching confirms the reality of what you believe you lack. Consider the psychological architecture of desire. When you seek enlightenment, peace, or truth, you unconsciously reinforce the belief that these states exist somewhere else, in some future moment, through some method or practice. The seeker's mind becomes a maze of techniques, teachers, and traditions, each promising the very thing that the act of seeking makes impossible. An ancient tale speaks of a man who spent decades searching for a magical jewel that would grant him happiness. He traveled to distant lands, studied with masters, performed countless rituals. One day, exhausted and defeated, he looked into a mirror and discovered the jewel embedded in his forehead. It had been there all along, but the very act of seeking had made it invisible to him. In contemporary life, this manifests as the endless spiritual marketplace. Meditation retreats, self-help courses, therapeutic modalities, all promising to deliver you from your current state to some improved version of yourself. The industry of transformation thrives precisely because it keeps you convinced that transformation is necessary. The practical insight. Notice when you are seeking and ask what assumption about lack underlies the search itself. The hunter who chases the shadow never catches the deer. The principles of conceptual imprisonment. Every concept you use to understand reality becomes a prison that prevents direct experience of reality. The mind operates through categories, labels, and frameworks. When you encounter something directly, immediately the conceptual apparatus begins its work of translation, comparison, and interpretation. The moment you say, "This is enlightenment," or "This is truth," you have moved away from the direct encounter into the realm of mental representation. There was once a Zen master who would destroy any statue of Buddha he encountered, declaring that Buddha was not to be found in images, but in direct seeing. His students were scandalized until they understood. Any concept of awakening, however sophisticated, was still a concept, and therefore a barrier to the awakening itself. Modern psychology has documented this as the observer effect, the way our method of observation alter what we observe. In the realm of consciousness, this effect is absolute. The tools you use to understand your mind become the very obstacles to understanding your mind. The practical insight. Hold all spiritual concepts lightly, as temporary pointers rather than final destinations. The principle of experiential avoidance. What you call spiritual seeking is often sophisticated avoidance of present moment reality. The uncomfortable truth is that seeking often serves as an elegant form of dissociation. Rather than fully inhabiting the messiness, uncertainty, and ordinariness of immediate experience, we project our attention towards some imagined future state of resolution. The seeking itself becomes a drug, providing the illusion of progress while maintaining distance from what is actually here. A contemporary example: the person who spends years in meditation, retreats, workshops, and spiritual communities, accumulating experiences and insights, yet remains fundamentally unchanged in their capacity to meet life's basic challenges with presence and compassion. The seeking has become a sophisticated form of spiritual bypassing. The practical insight. Notice when spiritual practice becomes a way of avoiding rather than engaging with immediate reality. Comfort is where desire dies, but discomfort is where seeking begins. The principle of the divided mind. The very structure of seeking creates and maintains the seeker-sought duality that is the root of suffering. This is perhaps the most radical insight. There is no separate self that could achieve enlightenment, find truth, or escape suffering. The entity that seeks is itself a construction of thought, a persistent illusion maintained by the very process of seeking. When you seek to transcend the ego, you strengthen the ego. When you try to find your true self, you reinforce the false self that is doing the seeking. An ancient tradition speaks of this as the cosmic joke. The one who would be enlightened is the very obstacle to enlightenment. The personal will that drives the seeking is exactly what must dissolve for truth to be revealed. Yet this dissolution cannot be achieved through effort, for effort itself is an expression of the personal will. In practical terms, this manifests as the spiritual paradox where intense practice can become its own trap, and the most sincere seekers can become the most subtly imprisoned by their very sincerity. The practical insight. Recognize that what you take to be yourself may be the primary obstacle to what you seek. We have established the fundamental deception that seeking perpetuates separation. Concepts imprison experience, and the seeker itself may be an illusion. But these insights merely scratch the surface of a more profound realization, one that few are prepared to face directly. What follows requires a different kind of courage. Not the courage to seek truth, but the courage to stop seeking altogether. The principle of choiceless awareness. True perception arises only when the choosing mind becomes completely still. The conventional approach to consciousness involves constant selection, choosing thoughts, choosing experiences, choosing states of being. But choice itself implies a chooser, and the chooser is the very mechanism that maintains separation from immediate reality. When choice ceases, not through suppression, but through understanding, what remains is pure awareness without a center. Consider the tradition that speaks of non-doing, not inactivity, but action that arises spontaneously without the mediation of personal will. This is not passivity, but the highest form of responsiveness. Like water that flows perfectly around obstacles without decision or effort. Contemporary neuroscience has begun to validate this ancient insight. The sense of being a decision maker may be a post hoc narrative created by the brain rather than an actual causal agent. Decisions appear to arise from deeper unconscious processes before the conscious mind claims credit for them. The practical insight. Experiment with periods of non-choosing, allowing experience to unfold without mental commentary or direction. The blade that cuts through illusion cannot be wielded by illusion itself. The principle of groundless ground. Ultimate reality has no foundation because it needs no foundation. It simply is. The seeking mind constantly looks for something solid to stand on, a system, a practice, a realization, an experience. But what if reality itself is utterly groundless? What if the search for security and spiritual attainment is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of existence itself? An ancient metaphor describes reality as space, completely open, without boundaries, without center or periphery, incapable of being grasped or possessed. Any attempt to make space into an object immediately fails, because space is the very condition that allows objects to appear. This groundlessness is not a problem to be solved, but the very nature of freedom itself. The mind that insists on security will never find it, because security would require making the groundless into something solid, an impossible task. The practical insight: practice resting in uncertainty without trying to resolve it into certainty. The principle of effortless effort: genuine transformation occurs through a paradoxical kind of action, effortful effortlessness. This points to perhaps the most subtle trap in spiritual development, the belief that awakening requires either intense effort or complete passivity. Both approaches miss the mark because both are based on the false premise that there is someone who could make awakening happen or prevent it from happening. True spiritual work resembles the way a flower opens. There is development. There is a kind of effort, but it is completely natural and without forcing. The flower doesn't try to bloom. Blooming is its nature when conditions are right. The contemporary equivalent might be found in states of flow, where action happens spontaneously and perfectly without the sense of a doer. The pianist's fingers move. The words appear on the page. The response arises to the situation, but without the familiar sense of personal authorship. The practical insight: notice the difference between forced effort and natural responsiveness in your spiritual practice. In the labyrinth of seeking, the exit appears only when you stop looking for it. The principle of ordinary enlightenment: what you seek in extraordinary experiences is already fully present in the most mundane moment. The final and perhaps most devastating insight is that consciousness itself, not some special state of consciousness, but ordinary awareness, is already what you have been seeking. The very capacity to read these words, to feel dissatisfied, to want something more, is the miracle that spiritual traditions have been pointing toward all along. This is why the tradition speaks of enlightenment as the most ordinary thing, like discovering that what you thought was gold was actually gold all along. The search for special experiences, peak states, or mystical realizations can become the very thing that obscures the extraordinary nature of ordinary consciousness. A master once said that before enlightenment he chopped wood and carried water, and after enlightenment he chopped wood and carried water. The activities remained the same, only the illusion of someone separate from the activities had dissolved. The practical insight: look for the sacred in the completely ordinary without trying to make it into something special. What we have uncovered reveals the ultimate paradox. The very act of seeking truth creates the illusion of separation from truth. The seeker, the path, and the goal are all movements within consciousness, not movements toward consciousness. This knowledge is a double-edged blade. Used wisely, it can cut through the endless cycle of seeking and reveal what was never actually hidden. Used carelessly, it can become another concept, another trap, another sophisticated form of the very seeking it was meant to dissolve. The invitation is not to stop all practice or inquiry, but to hold them lightly, as play rather than work, as exploration rather than acquisition, as celebration rather than attainment. When seeking ends, finding begins. When the question dissolves, the answer reveals itself as the very one who is asking. This forbidden knowledge asks nothing of you, but everything from you. It offers no comfort, no security, no achievement, only the radical freedom of discovering what you already are. If this exploration has touched something deeper than thought, share in the comments which insight impacted you most profoundly and why. Subscribe to continue this journey into the hidden dimensions of consciousness. And if this knowledge feels dangerous enough to spread, let others discover it through your engagement. The truth you seek is the truth that seeks through you. The escape you crave is escape from the one who craves escape. In the end, there is nowhere to go and no one to go there.